In the last video, we looked at an example of student loans and we calculated the monthly payment assuming that a student loan was worth a certain amount by the time a student graduated. One of the things that we didn't do was consider the interest that accrues while the student is in school. So in this video, let's look at an example of a student who borrows $10,000 at the beginning of college, and let's see what that actually accumulates to by the time they have all of that compound interest that accrues during the 10 years or whatever amount of time it takes them to pay off that loan. All right, so typically for undergraduate, federal, unsubsidized student loans, okay, that's a mouthful, but basically these are student loans where the student pays the interest, not the government, and the interest rate is charged at the rate for undergraduate loans, not graduate, which are actually usually higher than undergraduate rates. All right, so the way that these work, let's say the student takes out $10,000 at the beginning of their freshman year, and let's assume that this is a typical four-year college student. All right, so while the student is in school, the loan will accrue interest. However, it's simple interest during school. All right, so $10,000, and for 4 years, it just accrues simple interest. All right, then there's usually a grace period of 6 months after graduation, and simple interest does accrue during that time as well. All right, and then at that point, usually the repayment period begins, and typically a student will pay for 10 years. Okay, but that interest doesn't stop accruing, and in fact, after the 6 months grace period, it switches over to compound interest. All right, so there is a benefit both to paying interest while you're in school as well as paying off the loan or extra towards principal once you're repaying the loan. All right, so if the student chooses to pay the interest in school, then by the time they reach the end of the grace period, right here before they start making repayments, then at that point the principal would still be $10,000. However, many college students can't do that or just choose not to, or perhaps they don't know that that's an option, and so all of that simple interest accrues, and then by the time you get to this point, right before you make your first repayment, you owe more than $10,000. All right, so let's find out how much would be owed on this loan. So to do simple interest, we take $10,000, that's the principal, right? And then that accrues a certain percentage each year. Now the current federal undergraduate student loan rate at the time of making this video is 4.53%, right? So we would multiply by 0.0453 to find the amount of simple interest for 1 year. And then let's multiply by 4.5 to reflect the fact that interest is accruing for the 4 years during school and then the 6 months grace period after graduation. And you should find that that's $2,038.50. All right, so they actually owe, well, let's call this the new principal. All right, by the time they go to make their first payment, they owe $12,038.50. All right, and now interest starts compounding. So each month that goes by, they're going to be charged interest based on this principal amount, which is going to then be added into the principal balance, and then they'll be charged interest on that new amount. Okay. Now, if we wanted to find the total amount of interest that will accrue over the next 10 years, we have a choice of some formulas. So you don't actually want to use the compound interest formula, and we've talked about this before, but that's because you're going to be paying down this balance each month, so interest will accrue on a smaller and smaller amount each time, right? So you want to use the formula that accounts for making regular payments, right? So that's that one from the section of your reading that dealt with loans, okay? And that was payment equals principal times APR over N, and then this denominator, okay? And if we're calculating monthly payments, then N would be 12, and let's use 10 for the number of years since that's a standard repayment term. Now let's use $12,038.50 as the principal, so we'll assume that the student didn't pay off any of that interest during school, and we'll go with the current APR and fill in the rest of the formula. Oops. Okay, and if you work this out, then you'll see that there's a monthly payment of $124.94. Now to find the total amount that the student pays, okay, so this is $124.94 monthly for 10 years. So if you multiply that by 120 for the number of payments, then the total amount is $14,992.80. Okay, so the true cost of that $10,000 loan was closer to $15,000. All right, so the student's paying almost 50% of what they borrowed, an additional 50% of what they borrowed just in interest. All right, now let's compare this with a student who pays off that interest. All right, so if the loan is unsubsidized, there's no way to really avoid this $2,000 from accruing while you're in school, but you can do something about this compound interest. Okay, so let's say that the interest accrues, but each month while the student's in school, they pay off the interest. So by the time they get to make their first payment, the new principal would still just be $10,000. Okay, so in that case, interest just compounds on $10,000. And now the monthly payment is going to be $103.78. All right, and then if you multiply that by 120, let me do this in purple so we can keep track of the difference here. $103.78 monthly payment, and then overall that would be $12,453.60. Okay, but we still have to take into account the interest that the student paid during school. They paid off that simple interest, and we didn't have that number accounted for in this principal, so we still have to add that in. So once you do that, now the total amount that the student has paid is $14,492.10. Okay, so now we can make a fair comparison and see that the student saved about $500 by paying the interest off during school. So maybe a question you're wondering is it even feasible to take advantage of this? Is it feasible to expect a college student to already be thinking about paying interest on their student loan while they're in school? All right, so keep in mind they would be saving $500, but that would be over the course of 10 years. So I think it would kind of depend on how much they would need to pay each month in school, and then just what are the other circumstances involved. Because typically if somebody's borrowing a student loan, that means they can't pay for tuition in cash, so perhaps they really don't have the extra money to spare each month. All right, so here's how this works for determining how much interest is owed each month. All right, so we would take the principal that was borrowed, multiply that by the interest rate, and that tells us the amount of interest that accrues in 1 year. Okay, now we divide that by 365.25, and that tells us the daily interest that accumulates on the loan. Okay, so why 365.25? The 0.25 is to account for leap years where there's an extra day. And then this would give $1.24. All right, and then the interest amount per month would vary based on the number of days in a month. So for example, for a 30-day month, you're going to owe a little bit less than for a month with 31 days. Okay, so like in a 30-day month, the student would owe $37.20 in interest. Okay, so you can decide if that seems reasonable, and I think it would depend on the person and the situation. But this particular student would be looking at monthly payments of $37 or $38 all during the 4 years that they're in school, and the advantage would be saving about $500 over the next 10 years. One other thing to keep in mind is that this is a fairly small amount compared to tuition rates today. So you can just imagine if it were something closer to $10,000 a semester, and then that again for 4 years, you could be looking at an interest payment that's significantly higher than $37. Long story short, these are kind of the two ends of the spectrum, but you could choose to do something in the middle. Maybe you make some interest payments while you're in school when you can, and maybe you decide not to pay any interest when it's not possible. So you do have options.